You ever hear a story so unbelievable that even the man telling it wonders if anyone will believe him? Well, this is one of those stories. And the man who lived it, he never wanted the world to know. Not because he was afraid, not because he wanted glory, but because what happened on that mission still wakes him up at night, long after the sounds of war faded from his ears. He always said, "Some missions follow you home." And this one never left him. My name doesn't matter, and neither does the date stamped on the operation report. But what does matter is that what unfolded in those mountains, isolated, unforgiving, and painted with the shadows of an enemy that outnumbered him 200 to 1, remains one of the most unexplainable, impossible missions a Delta Force operator has ever survived. It started with an intel leak, not a small one. Someone had passed the location of an American forward outpost to an insurgent militia known for swarming their targets in numbers heavy enough to suffocate any resistance. The outpost held 5 men, 5 good men, and they had no idea that 200 enemy fighters were marching toward them like a flood of darkness. The call came in fast, too fast. Intercept team en route? Negative. Air support? Weather blackout. Backup QRF? 40 minutes out, minimum. 40 minutes might as well have been a lifetime. The only man close enough to intervene was him, a Delta operator with the call sign Spectre. Nobody remembered who gave him that name, but it fit. He moved like a shadow, hit like a phantom, and disappeared before the enemy understood they were dying. He'd saved teams, civilians, even rival special operators more times than anyone could count. But what he was about to walk into was different. For the first time in his career, he wasn't being sent on a mission. He was going on a rescue he knew he probably wouldn't come back from. He was helicopter dropped 3 miles from the outpost, far enough to avoid enemy detection, close enough to sprint on foot. Night vision on, rifle locked, pack light, heart steady, breathing calm. He trained for decades for situations like this, but nothing could prepare him for what waited ahead. The first sign of trouble came from the comms. The outpost had gone silent. And when an American outpost goes silent, it's never for a good reason. He moved faster. The mountains around him swallowed sound, turning footsteps into whispers. Even through night vision, the air looked thick, like it was holding its breath. He crested a ridge and froze. Below him, scattered like ants swarming a wounded animal, were enemy fighters, scores of them. Lines of men snaking through the valley, moving with deadly purpose. 200 bodies, maybe more. And at the center of it all, the outpost. Or what was left of it. One of the guard towers was burning. A second was collapsed. And the silence was no longer a warning. It was confirmation. He clicked his comm. "Outpost, this is Spectre. Do you copy?" Static. "Anyone alive? Sound off." Static. Then a whisper. 2 words. So faint he almost missed him. North corner. A survivor. Maybe more than one. That was enough. Spectre moved down the mountain, keeping low, blending into the rocks, slipping through shadows like an animal stalking prey. He was close enough to see faces now, not expressions, faces. Men chanting, shouting orders, spreading out, preparing to breach the remaining building that held his team. If he waited for his QRF, they'd be too late. If he engaged from this distance, he'd be spotted. If he tried to slip in quietly, he'd be surrounded. No perfect choice, just one he could live or die with. He set his rifle down and pulled out something rarely used, but always deadly, a diversion charge. Not big enough to kill anyone, big enough to cause chaos. He placed it behind a boulder, angled it toward the valley, and timed it. 5 seconds. He slid back into cover. Boom. The explosion echoed off the mountain walls, bouncing like thunder trapped inside stone. The enemy ranks split instantly. Confusion, panic, men shouting, running, scattering toward the noise. And Spectre moved. He crossed the ground faster than any man should with that much gear. The world narrowed to a tunnel. Target, movement, breathe, step, shift, repeat. He slipped through gaps between fighters who never even looked in his direction. Every second was borrowed time, and he knew time always demands it be paid back. He reached the outpost broken wall and slipped inside. Bodies, smoke, spent casings, blood trails leading toward the one structure still standing. He pushed the door in. 3 men were inside. 2 wounded, 1 barely conscious, all surprised to see a single operator standing where they had expected an enemy horde. "Spectre," one whispered. "Who else? You're alone? For now. You know how many are out there. Too many for you to be here when they figure out that bomb wasn't an attack." The wounded men couldn't walk on their own. Not fast, anyway. He needed time. And time was the one thing the enemy wasn't giving.
He barricaded the door, set tripwires, planted another diversion charge, and pulled the team toward the back exit. But before they made it, the first enemy voice sounded outside. Then another. Then dozens. They'd figured it out. The real attack was still coming, and it was coming from him. The walls shook as the enemy began firing into the building. Spectre pushed the survivors into a storage room, set a claymore on the doorframe, and moved back into the main hall. He switched his rifle to full auto. He wasn't planning on winning. He was planning on lasting long enough. The door exploded inward, and Spectre opened fire, cutting down the first 3 men. A flashbang rolled in. He kicked it back out. Screams, confusion, smoke. He moved between cover like a ghost weaving through death. But they kept coming. 10, 20, 30. 1 man fighting an army. He dropped mags, reloaded, fired until barrels smoked. Shadows crossed his vision like flickering threats. The claymore detonated, shaking dust loose from the ceiling. The wounded men behind him shouted for him to fall back. But Spectre didn't fall back. He moved forward, against all logic, against all survival instincts, against the fact that no man should be able to fight 200 enemies alone. But here's the thing. He wasn't fighting all of them. Not really. Spectre understood something most people don't. War isn't won by killing every enemy. It's won by breaking their will to keep fighting. So he made himself look bigger, more dangerous. He made them believe the outpost wasn't being defended by 1 man, but by something they couldn't see. He changed firing positions constantly, using different calibers from weapons left by fallen soldiers. An AK burst here, an M4 single shot there, a sniper pop from the window above. They believed multiple shooters were inside. And fear spread faster than bullets. The enemy hesitation bought him minutes. Minutes he needed. Minutes that felt like hours. But fear can only last so long. Before anger takes over. They regroped. They pushed forward. They overwhelmed the entrance again. Spectre was hit. Shoulder. Non-fatal, but deep. He fell back into a hallway, gritting his teeth, gripping the wound. Blood soaked his sleeve. He felt the world tilting, heard the ringing in his ears turning into a roar. Then he heard something else. Rotors. QRF. 40 minutes had turned into 33. Still too long for most men. But Spectre had fought long enough for the sound of salvation to reach the mountains. The enemy heard it too. Panic, retreat, shouts of warning, men scattering into the hills like ants avoiding floodwater. But not all of them. Some stayed. Some were determined to finish what they started. They rushed the hall as Spectre leaned against the wall, forcing his body to stay upright. He raised his rifle again. He fired until he heard boots behind him. American boots. Hands pulling him back. Voices yelling his name. The operator who refused to die finally dropped his weapon and let the adrenaline fade. When he woke up, he was on a medevac bird, stitched, bandaged, oxygen mask strapped to his face. Across from him were the men he saved. Alive. Because of him. His commander asked him, "How many did you engage?" Spectre stared out the window at the mountains fading below and said, "Too many." He never gave a number. The official report never did either. But every man in that valley that night knows the truth. One Delta Force operator walked into a swarm of 200 enemy fighters and came out alive. Not a ghost, not a myth, a man. A man who refused to let his team die. And if you ask him today how he survived, he won't talk about skill or training or luck. He'll say the same 5 words. You don't think, you move. Because sometimes survival isn't about overpowering the enemy. Sometimes it's about outlasting the darkness long enough for dawn to arrive. If you want more incredible, true, and untold military missions like this one, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another story here on Military Stories.